Welcome to FranklinCovey's Lead Through Uncertainty, the podcast to help business leaders navigate the pressure of AI and unpredictable markets with bold, creative solutions. In today's fast-changing economic world where uncertainty seems constant, senior executives and HR leaders are being pushed beyond traditional playbooks. To emerge stronger, more resilient, and truly future-ready, organizations must behave differently. Because doing what's always been done won't just hold businesses back, it could leave them behind. It's time to act different, to emerge different. I'm your host, Patrick Leddin, and through my research and years of experience, I've studied how disruption can leave organizations in the dust if not handled properly. Over the course of 6 episodes, we will cover topics such as task prioritization, skill building, resilient cultures, and more. Today's episode is all about thriving through disruption. And here to talk about it with us today is President of the Enterprise Division of FranklinCovey, Jennifer Colosimo. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm pleased to be spending some time with you talking about this important topic.
I am pleased to spend some time with you. And so the audience knows, you and I have known each other for a number of years. I've watched you excel in so many different roles. And I'm so excited today to talk to you about, from your perspective throughout your career and in your role today, what does it take to really thrive through these moments of disruption? I was wondering if we could start off, if you could just share with me a little bit about a time when thinking differently led to a breakthrough for your own team or organization. And if so, what was the key to the shift?
Well, Patrick, I think as a starting place, and you said this in the introduction, staying the same isn't an option. It just isn't. With forgiveness, please, from all of those physicists who study thermodynamics applied to people, I really think that your choice at status quo is thinking differently, having those breakthroughs, or entropy, right? The ice cream melts, the air comes out of your tires, and in a business sense, you will lose your market dominance, you will lose customer loyalty, you will lose we're a workplace of choice. And so when it's not an option, I think what you really have to focus on, what's key to that shift is, and I'm going to use this word different than just the way you normally use it, listening. And that might be that I'm listening to you, but it might be that I just put a bunch of data into an AI tool and it came back with kind of a consolidation of the data. It might mean that I'm listening to customer feedback, finding out what's happening in the market, what employees are saying. And when you're listening, then you make a choice. This is strategically what we are going to do. This is going to be the breakthrough. And people always ask me, how do you know? I'll ask you when I finish this sentence, you don't. You are making choices to take you to the next stage. And based on all of the listening, you're coming to what do I think is the absolute best choice for the majority of the stakeholders. By the way, I've never been involved with one that every stakeholder, every individual was happy. Yeah. It's just, this is what we need to do. And you ask about the one that I really think about. We're in the business of people and organizational performance, breakthroughs, and partnering with our clients. And for over 20 years, I believe we had a model that made that partnership and the impact that's derived from it difficult, just out of our business model. And it's hard to make a shift, but we completely shifted our business model and therefore saw the next stage of evolution in our ability to drive impact for our clients and a tighter partnership.
So for people I'd love to dig into that shift a little bit, because there's people probably trying to make shifts either in their team or strategically in their organization. When you're trying to make that shift and kind of inspire some change, what do you think is the biggest obstacle people run into? What was the biggest obstacle you saw our organization run into?
Well, you can always have systems and processes, and how will that be recorded financially? I don't put those in the big obstacle category.
Okay.
Frankly, and I mean this in the most positive way of someone who completely loves humans and human behavior, it's humans. There's this paradoxical thing that Human beings are incredibly adaptable, and at the same time wired to be safe. As we know, over the last several years, we've talked a lot about psychological safety. I mean, people don't want to be humiliated. Can I ask a question? Can I challenge? Do I feel safe in exploring alternatives? Or have I been taught to be quiet and do what I'm told, right? There's the psychological. There's also the true safety. I am worried now that I will lose my job and therefore won't be able to support my family. I'm worried, real safety, but I think a lot of it is fear. I need to learn this whole new tech stack. And what if I look dumb? What if I can't learn it that fast? I feel unmoored. And so I think honestly, the biggest challenge is humans. And as leaders, are we intentional? First off, I think giving a little grace that any individual that you work with, and then a team culture or an organizational culture will be different in how they face the disruption, how they come out of adoption. If you truly get to that stage of what you're expecting with innovation and you meet them where they are, not forever. Some changes you just have to say, yeah, okay, in the end, we're doing it. We've been having a lot of dialogue. We've been addressing the obstacles, but you meet them where they are. Do you acknowledge obstacles or just be, that's not a big deal. Let's not talk about it. And you have a really strong case for this. Why are we doing it? What happens if we don't? What are the costs of change failure? And as much as possible, what does it mean for you?
You know, I've known you for, like I said, quite a while, Jen. I've seen you lead through changes. And one thing I've really admired about how you handle change is you have a really good, I guess, radar for it, but it's probably been a skill you've honed over time of kind of knowing what's important, knowing not what's not important, kind of I don't want to say dismissing, but taking things that are not that important and say, okay, we're not going to focus our energy there. We'll focus on the things that are important. But at the same time, that business sense that you have, you manage to couple really well with thinking about people and like the humanity of this whole thing. Has that been something that kind of came to you naturally? Did you learn it over the course of time? Did you fall down a couple times? I mean, how did you figure that out? You may not see it the same way as I do, but I can tell you as an outsider, many of us think the same thing.
Well, first, I'm honored. Thank you. And believe me, there are many that know me, if they listen to this podcast, that will be like, Patrick, I would like to call and tell you an example of where she did not do that well at all. I think, obviously, in human behavior, I think it can be learned, and it was completely learned for me. Also, as a leader, you may have fear that it looks like you're losing control. If you are open to challenges, just outright challenges, if you're open to questions, if you're open to people telling you the real obstacles, and I mean, to use some FranklinCovey content, you have to be confident in, I know who I am and what I'm trying to do, and a challenge to this change, a challenge to this process is not a challenge to me. Let's really dialogue and have the skills to have that. And I mean, I think it depends on the risk and visibility and a whole bunch of different things. Sometimes I've had to say, okay, so we are doing it. The customer data says it, the market data says it. This is what we're doing to evolve to the next level. So let's focus on, number one, what's the challenge for you? And that might be at a team or group level. And how do we overcome that obstacle? And then what am I missing? What am I missing? There may be something that you're missing, but that I think that's the interesting thing, particularly in this, in our age of gen technology and evolving technology. There are some things that are uniquely human, and they can be learned to make you better with disruption and leading through uncertainty.
Well, you mentioned teams there, Jen, and you said sometimes you have to make the decision, we are going to do this. So there are going to be people listening to the podcast right now that maybe they're leading a frontline team, maybe they're leading leaders who are leading teams, but they're at that moment where they're like, okay, we're going to do this thing. But at the same time, beyond making that decision or recognizing it, they have to then lead a team through this. What qualities do you think define a team that can successfully navigate through this uncertainty?
This also, I think, has to be learned. Our CEO recently had an article, so I'm going to attribute to him that he posted. And it isn't an automatic to go from you were an individual contributor to now you lead a team and you have to help them navigate, because you want, I mean, the easiest, and I'm saying this with all honesty, is just command and control. Mm-hmm. Patrick, do it. Yeah. Why are we talking about this? I said to do it. Unfortunately, that's not what drives the navigation of being able to manage all these transitions. And so developing the skill of, as I said, really being able to listen in dialogue. I also think at a broad level, are there opportunities in your team or your organization to try new things? Is this something that's been shown to be safe? That you can find out a new way that this is being done in your industry. You can suggest new tool sets. How can you expect adaptability if there's no exposure to it? Mm-hmm. Or even internally, are they exposed? I think a lot of very, very frontline leaders, lots of layers of management are being eliminated. And so we're expecting of frontline some things that you used to expect from mid, right? Can you convey the reasoning? Can you communicate effectively? And the absolute opposite is, in this case, Jen said to is not a case for change, right? But what's the why, what, how? And then finally, and we touched on this, regardless of the change, expect that individuals, teams, and even what you've culturally set up will lead to different initial reactions. It can't even be, think about it, I'm sure you've had this happen, what's going on outside of work. Mm-hmm. You know, you're thinking, why this level of resistance to navigate this? And it has nothing to do with work.
Oh, that's true.
Sometimes just wanting to be heard and accepting maybe their change capability is just a little lower today. But I think it's exposing to outside things and ensuring that this is something that is normal to adapt. Internally, making sure they know the strategy behind it, being able to have that dialogue and the vision for the future as well as the short-term benefit, and then meeting people, teams, organizations where they are so you can evolve that capability.
You know, I think I told you this one time. I can't remember, but for the audience, they wouldn't know it. So I taught at Vanderbilt. I taught a course called Leading Business Through Times of Crisis. And we would bring in different guest speakers to talk. And there's one particular person said something that really stuck with me. It was Doug Parker, who was the CEO of American Airlines. And he said, a crisis is never the time to start making introductions. And his point was, you know, you need to be building these relationships and kind of working that relationship muscle long before the crisis moment comes along. And I would imagine when you think about teams, you know, a lot of this work needs to be done when you're not in those heavy moments of uncertainty. That's when you learn how to carry ambiguity for a while, is when we're not in those moments. But I think sometimes as leaders, we don't realize that investment needs to be made in those moments, or we don't see them because we're busy looking at some other short-term thing. But you tell me, I mean, in those times where we're not in heavy amounts of uncertainty, what kind of investment should we be making in our team to prepare them?
Well, I am a big user, so I want to make sure, you know, I'll use every project management tool, Asana, Notion, all the docs, you know, the Google Doc that's here. I'll use Clary to record calls. You know, I'm doing a bunch of tool sets. I'm all for that you're enabled through a good tech stack and process. And I have suffered from this exact challenge so much that I'm now a huge advocate for it. This is why I advocate one-on-ones. So there is the person on your team that you're thinking, they're good. If we meet once a quarter, it's fine, you know, and I'm talking directs or maybe even some occasional skips with your high performers. But then the moment comes, the big uncertain moment comes, the crisis comes, and you have only been communicating to them to part of your tech stack, and you've got to call and say, hey, there's this major change and I need you to do X, Y, and Z, and there's nothing there, no trust, no relationship, you're just calling out of the blue with this new thing, much harder than someone, even if you've only got bi-weeklies or monthlies, if you haven't invested in that, it's really hard to then lead particular individuals or even teams that you collaborate with if you're a leader at a bigger scale, if this is the first time you're calling procurement.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned one-on-ones, and I think through my own calendar, I've had a lot of one-on-ones, like where I'm the second one in the one-on-one. So I'll say my leader and myself, okay, one-on-one, and they're on my calendar, and I kind of am not thrilled that it's going to have to happen because maybe I had a couple bad ones, and then once you have a good one with someone, you're like, okay, I want more of that. But I would argue that there are a sizably larger number of one-on-ones that are put on people's calendars than are actually executed. So because they get pushed off for different reasons. You tell me, as an executive in an organization with a ton of stuff going on, and uncertainty is just your certainty these days, probably. Yes. You tell me, like, advocate for why those have to be held.
Well, and people have a variety of different scopes. When we work with our clients or when we're coaching and you're meeting with them, sometimes people have 25 people, right? Yeah. As a layer has been. So I'm not trying to say that you should be unreasonable with this. And think about what you can get out of a one-on-one. And this is a balance of short-term and long-term strategy. You can ask good questions. You can, from a coaching standpoint, you can provide feedback more immediately than the next performance cycle in a way that actually increases the capability of the things you can get done because they get more capable, increases the capability of the organization. And I don't know how to build trust in a relationship without setting expectations. Yes, I have all the scoreboards. I know how well they're doing without ever talking to them because everybody has a scoreboard. But am I providing good coaching? Am I providing good feedback? Because what I think you're doing there is you're building the capability of the whole organization. And from a selfish standpoint, you're building the capability of your team, which allows you and the team to do different things and be more effective in navigating uncertainty.
Yeah, that's actually the point I think that hits me so hard is when you talked about, well, I know the scoreboards and I know certain things. And when I think about the one-on-ones that I would dub as not that great of an effective an experience, it's when I'm going over things that have already been reported, or they could have been handled in an email. The ones where I think about, those are really good ones, are where it is a coaching conversation. Sometimes it's a challenging me conversation or challenging my mindset type of conversation. Those are the ones that I feel are extremely valuable, and ones where the leader is willing to clear some obstacles, like allow me to come with some challenges that I'm facing and not just like look at me and say, good luck with all that, but maybe make a phone call that I could bang my head against the wall for, 3 days and they can solve really quickly. I know it's a balancing act to try to figure out what things you take and what things you let people hang on to, but I do see the difference in the two so clearly.
Well, and I think you have to move toward the challenges to what you're trying to implement. So, in our own organization, there's been a system implementation recently that's pretty big. It was a 2-year project. And one of the functions has some challenges. And I heard the headline, but to actually take time and say, okay, so what happens when that happens? And what happens when that happens? And what happens when that happens? Until you're finally saying, oh, so we can't send an invoice until that gets fixed? Right? It's not just the people challenges. There's also some business challenges that you get into it. And you often hear people start with the people challenges. And this particular leader is so capable that you can ask a few questions and they can solve it. But I really think in unpredictable environments, it's important that you're empowering where they can take it and you are helping clear the obstacles when that's something that you can uniquely do.
Earlier on, you mentioned the idea of not having all the answers, or not knowing, I should say, right? Not knowing what's going to happen. How do you make decisions like that from your perspective when things are unpredictable and you don't necessarily know. I mean, what's your approach? How can leaders be a little bit more, a little smarter in the choices they make when they have to make a decision, but they don't have all the information?
If only there could be perfect information.
Yeah, I know that magic eight ball just keeps saying,
I know, I have
unclear, try again later.
I'm not going to advocate for the listeners that they use it, but I have one. Honestly, the way I break it down, dependent on the issue, is, okay, it may be in an international, in a different market, right? So in that case, what is the socioeconomic information I'm going to look at, the geopolitical, in this world, sometimes weather, right? What are the broad issues? And then how much do you need to know? And it's the same groups, from your customer in that environment, from your employees, your team members in that environment, from the market, and shareholders, dependent on your ownership structure. What do I all bring that together? And of course, I don't do this in a vacuum, but then, okay, that's what we know right now. I think you can't get paralyzed. Mm-hmm. Some things, of course, require a longer tail because it's such a big decision-making process. But I've also seen leaders become paralyzed where the best thing to do would be to say, this is where we are. This is what we know. Got all the boxes. This is what we're going to do. Even if it's imperfect. Yeah. Can you adjust dependent on the risk and visibility? Can you make a small modification? But the paralyzing, let's do nothing, again, how I started, just leads to actually being worse off.
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes you're in the meetings where you'll hear a senior leader say something like, well, let's revisit this in 30, 60, 90 days. And I think with the speed sometimes that things are moving at, first of all, half the room's like saying, please make a decision, boss. And at the same time, like either A, things aren't going to be that much different in 30 days, or they're going to be so different, we should have gotten out in front of this thing. So either way, sometimes, yeah, I agree. You have to sometimes gather some information, but don't let that paralysis by analysis. You mentioned globally. Could you speak a little bit, Jen, to so the audience knows kind of like your global responsibilities? 'Cause I want to ask you a couple questions about leading a global team.
Sure. So FranklinCovey partners with clients globally. We're in 160 countries. And so the responsibility in the division is our sales, customer success, marketing, finance, right? All the things that operations around the globe. We have, in some cases, it's very directly owned, and in some cases with a partner network.
And so you spend a sizable amount of your time, I would imagine, working with international, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So with that kind of setting the table that way, sometimes we can get really kind of, almost, at least me, like a little myopic in my thinking, or my worldview is the only view. And we feel this uncertainty, in the US and North America. Tell me what the rest of the world is feeling. What are these owners and partners saying to you? What I'm not asking you to give me the details of every economic situation around the globe, but give us a feel. Like what's the feeling out there?
Well, number one, what I admire about those that we partner with and those that we work with in our direct offices is I believe they are all doing what I just said. Here's what we know, so therefore here's how I'm going to act, right? Here's what I'm going to do. Everybody's looking at how to be most effective amidst the uncertainty. And some are finding that the choices that we're making are working really well. Here's what I would say globally, just global clients globally. When the U.S. is uncertain, it impacts the whole world.
Yeah.
And then they've had their own unique, there was a big delay in getting this person elected in a particular country, or a very controversial decision made in that country, or their currency isn't standing up against the dollar as they would like. So, of course, they have their own unique. But I think right now, uncertainty that is felt in the U.S. has ripples.
Yeah, that makes total sense. As we wrap up our conversation, and Jen, I really appreciate you taking the time, especially in the first of the series, to talk a little bit, because you're just a wealth of information from like day to day in the trenches of this, dealing with uncertainty, dealing with these type of things. What advice would you give to leaders who are navigating major transitions, and whether they're in a position like yours with sizable consequence in their decisions, or team leaders who have sizable consequences in their decisions? Because everybody does. I mean, what advice would you give them about navigating kind of these major transitions that are going on?
Well, number one, by the way, I think the world is run by first level leaders, because you are cascading and expecting them to be really on the front line working to make sure that this navigation or the change happens. Number one, no matter who you are, I would bet, because I know I find myself in this exact situation, you are not communicating enough. And that can be two things. You are not telling stories that celebrate success, right? That give people the motivation and inspiration to get going. You're not talking with some level of humility. I was wrong. Here's how we're going to adapt. Or maybe it wasn't we were wrong. We're going to need to adapt. So sometimes it's talking. Most often it's curiosity and listening. How is that going? What happened when that happened? What did you experience? And I'm talking about with your people, of course, but with your clients and outside, you're just not communicating enough. I would say listening more than speaking, but dependent on your level, you may think, I've said this a million times, just do it already. And I just have never found that exactly to work. Of course, there's logical consequences if certain things don't done, but no involvement, no commitment. So I would really focus on how, your case for change, ensuring you're matching inspiration with execution, and that you are remaining curious about how to make this happen, not frustrated.
Oh, I love it. Well, Jen, this has been truly informative and insightful. Thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks to the listeners. If you're interested in more information about how to navigate disruption, schedule my keynote called Disrupt Everything. It's based on a book that I co-authored with the world's best-selling author, James Patterson. It's a book of the same title called Disrupt Everything. It doesn't come out until September 29th, but Jim and I decided to partner with FranklinCovey and make books available through them and keynotes available through them throughout the summer and well beyond the time the book is launched. For more information, see the show notes below. But then again, thanks again for listening to the conversation today. Thanks to Jen for joining us. My name's Dr. Patrick Leddin. Now go make it a great day.